Hi, I'm Edouard Machery, and I'm a distinguished professor of history and philosophy of science at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm also the director of the Center for Philosophy of Science, also at the University of Pittsburgh. And today I want to tell you a few things about the notion of human nature. Now, when one thinks about human nature, one can ask, in fact, several distinct questions. One question one might ask is, what are humans like? What is part of human nature? For example, is jealousy part of human nature? Is altruism part of human nature? Is empathy part of human nature? Another question one might ask is the following one. One might ask whether something follows, if something is part or is not part of human nature. Why does it matter? What is the significance of human nature? So, for example, is if ownership is part of human nature, what are the consequences of that fact, for example, for political and moral philosophy, for the social organization of our societies? But before these two questions, there are a handful of questions that must be answered. Perhaps surprisingly, there is a debate in philosophy and also in biology about whether there is such a thing as human nature. So a first question to answer is, well, is there such a thing as a human nature? And in fact, if the answer is yes, in what sense is there such a thing as a human nature? Now, you might be surprised to learn that, in fact, over the last 70 years, many philosophers and other people in the humanities, but also many scientists, have denied that there is such a thing as a human nature. Very famously, some existentialist philosophers, first among them the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, has denied that there is such a thing as human nature. For Sartre, the French philosopher, indeed, the thing we learn about human beings is that there is no such thing as human nature. We are entirely free to be whatever we want. Many feminists, philosophers, and also some philosophers and humanities scholars interested in social and political change have also been critical of the notion of human nature because that notion has often been used in the past for social and political purposes to put limit to what human beings are able to do. In the 18th century, the French philosopher Rousseau has indeed appealed to human nature in order to limit what women could do, in order to put some sexist limitations and justify the sexist domination on women. But perhaps more surprisingly, over the last 40 years, it's evolutionary biologists who have been at the forefront of denying that there is such a thing as human nature. So here are a few quotations from either evolutionary biologists or philosophers of biology. The very famous philosopher of biology, also biologist himself, David Hull, wrote in a very well-known article in 1986 that he was suspicious of continued claims about the existence and importance of human nature. The evolutionary biologist Michael Giselin, in a book in 1997, agreed with David Hull. And he wrote, and that's a quotation, "What does evolution teach us about human nature?" And here's how he answered. It tells us that human nature is a superstition. And it would be very easy to add many other philosophers of biology and evolutionary biologists to this long list of scientists and philosophers of science who have denied the reality of human nature. Now, in past work, I've argued at length and in detail that, in fact, those people are mistaken. There is a robust, interesting, and important notion of human nature. And indeed, I've also argued that this human nature, so characterized, is in fact a target of inquiry for important scientific disciplines, such as, for example, the discipline concerned with the evolution of the human mind. So what is this notion of human nature that I have defended? I've called it the nomological notion of human nature, but don't be afraid with this terminology. The idea is very simple. On this view, human nature is made up of all the traits that are common to most human beings and that are the product of evolution. Some of these traits will be shared by many other animals, maybe by many other mammals, or maybe more narrowly by many primates. And a few of these traits, maybe many of these traits, might be shared only by human beings. They might be unique to the human species. So, for example, one might think that on this view, being bipedal is a characteristic is part of human nature. It's a characteristic of human beings. One might also think that biparental investment, the fact that in the human species, men and women both invest in the development of their offspring, is also part of human nature. It's very widespread in the human species, it's common to most human beings, and it has an evolutionary history. This evolutionary history might be specific to the human species, or it might be broader. It might be shared by other primate species, or even more broadly by mammalian species. So, other example of traits or characteristics that might be part of human nature is the capacity to speak, for example, the capacity to play, the capacity to imitate, and so on and so forth. So that's a notion of human nature that I think is really quite important because it reveals a few things about our species. It reveals that our species is in fact that human beings, the members of our species, are in fact extremely similar to one another. This notion of human nature makes human nature to be very thick. There's a lot of things one can say about human beings that most human beings have in common and that they share because of a common evolutionary history. What's more, this notion is also important because it defines a target of inquiry for many scientific disciplines, such as, for example, the evolutionary study of the human mind and of human behavior. It's important to realize, however, that this notion of human nature is entirely compatible with acknowledging first the role of culture and the role of history in creating variation among human beings. So it's compatible with the existence of cultural psychology and anthropology as discipline focused on human variation. It does not deny the importance of variation. It does not deny that culture and nature interact in complex manners during the evolution of human beings. What it insists, however, is that there are features, traits, characteristics that are common to all human beings and that can be explained on evolutionary grounds, that can be given an evolutionary explanation.